G'day everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the airplane tutorial, the final part where we're going to be finishing off where we left off in part 1, obviously. So this is where we finished up. We now have the finished model of our 747 looking pretty fine. So we've basically got all the hard stuff done, which is good. Now is the fun stuff, which is the texturing. So what we're going to be doing in this part, we're going to start by UV unwrapping this image, this model, and then taking it into an image editor such as GIMP or Photoshop. In my case, I'm going to be using Photoshop. And once we've got this, we're then going to be adding in things like the windows and the doors. And then after that, adding in our own custom decals for whatever company you want to make up. Lots of interesting stuff that can be applied to any number of different vehicles that you want to make. So cool stuff there. And then after that, of course, we're going to be putting it into a scene, adding in a backdrop, the lighting, which is pretty basic, and basically ending up with a result that looks something like this by the end of it. So if you haven't done part 1, you can go ahead and do that now, or you can go ahead and download the model for this underneath the video if you're watching this on Blender Guru. But yeah, anyways, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to start with the hard stuff, which is UV unwrapping this model. Now, having a look at this model, you might be a little bit overwhelmed trying to think of how you could possibly UV unwrap something as complex as this. Now, I've tried a number of different methods for doing this, and I found that the best method to use is project from view, which is basically you choose a spot like this, and then you just project that. Now there is, of course, downsides and upsides to whatever method you choose, but this is the one that I found works quite well, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But basically, whenever you're UV unwrapping anything, you just need to think of, first of all, how it's going to be painted, what parts are actually going to need a lot of detail to it. Can you get away with doing something shorter as opposed to doing something that's going to take forever? Like instead of doing a really complex UV unwrapping with all these seams and everything like that, can you get away with something like project from view? And then just experiment. So that's the way that I came up with this method. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into it. So for starters, we can go ahead and turn off the background images. So we've just got the model here. So from this view, if we split this and then set this to UV image editor. Okay, now if we just select that model and then hit U and then select project from view, then what you'll get is an exact representation of the model that's over here, now pasted over onto the UV image editor. So basically, if we took this into Photoshop, we could draw over here on this part right here, and then it would appear on our plane over here, once we, of course, add it into the materials. So that's all fine and dandy. By the way, if you find that it's like really hard to move this around, that's because the subsurf modifier is turned on. So if you turn that off, then it should be a lot smoother. It shouldn't affect it. I don't know why it does, but whatever. Anyways, now having a look at this, the next thing you want to sort of weigh up is so looking at, what part of the plane needs the most detail. That's important. And would a square image suit this? So most of the detail of this plane is going to be horizontally. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense to keep this as a square box, because the largest that we can now make the plane is from there to there, which leaves all of this empty. And really, we're not going to be doing a lot of other things apart from the wing, which doesn't need this much space. So it makes sense to actually create an image which is going to match the proportions of our model. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to take the width that is right here, and I'm going to multiply this by 4. Now you can get out a calculator if you want, or if you're smart, you can do it right in Blender just by hitting the star key and then 4 and then enter, and it'll actually do the calculation for you. That's something a lot of new people don't know. And then with the height, I'm going to times that by 2. So we've now got basically a width that is twice as long as it is high. And I'm just going to give this a name. Let's just call it UV, and I'm going to set the color to be solid white and then hit OK. And there we go. So twice as long as it is high. Excellent. Now the problem is that our plane is now all squished. So what you want to do then is go ahead and redo what we just did, project from view, and now it is the correct proportions. And you can see that that is now properly fitting this area a lot better because it's now twice as long. So we can still fit in the wing, we can still add in a few other objects over here if we want, but the majority of it is giving us enough room that we can add in that detail. Now, by the way, if you find that it is still squished and still stretching, that's because you've got the renderer set to cycles. So I'll show you what I mean. If this is set to cycles and then you hit project from view, look at that. Now, I'm fairly certain this is a bug, and I'm going to go ahead and report this as soon as I finish making this tutorial, because I only just realized it whilst I was practicing. But I don't know if it is a bug or whatever, but I'm going to call it a bug because it's a bug to me. It's always hard whenever you report something. You don't know if you're going to get called out for, no, it's a feature. Anyway, whatever. So set it to Blender internal, and then you'll be able to do some UV unwrapping. We are going to do cycles for rendering, but just for this part, internal, okay? All right, so great. So lengthways, looking at it side on, it's pretty good. But the wing, look at the wing. It's all bunched up here, looks terrible. So we actually want to do the same thing, project from view, for the wing only, top down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just select all of this right here, and make sure you select this edge loop there, as well as making sure that you select the flap. So if I hit L, there we go, got the flap there. Okay, that's all fine and down. Oh, hang on, what's going on here? Maybe that shouldn't be like that. That should be, I'm just sorry. Forgive me, guys. I just have to fix up my model. There was something that was out of place, which means you have to UV unwrap everything again. Anyway, do that again. Select the wing. Feels like I'm working on a time limit here, which really I am. And the time limit is your patience. So L, there we go. All right, now top-down view, hit U, project from view, and there we go. So now what we can do is we can paint basically directly onto the wing from top down, and whatever texturing that we want to do is now going to appear there. Now the texturing for the wing, we're just going to be adding in some lines and some little rivets and things like that to better represent, you know, how a wing actually looks. Like it's like panel metal or folded metal, whatever you want to call it, like, you know. So that's what we're going to be doing to it. So not a lot of texturing, but some. So that's why it helps to have it, you know, from top down. Gives us a bit of leeway. Now these little tails of the wing, these aren't actually going to be used at all. So you can go ahead and select all of these, and let's just scale those down and move them out. Now for the rest of it is pretty much all fine and dandy except for the engines. Now the engines need to have some texturing applied to it, because we're going to be adding in, you know, some lines and some rivets again, just like the wing. And as well as that, if you wanted to, you could also add in the logo of the plane there and maybe some wording or whatever else. Anyway, the engine generally needs a little bit of detail, so that's why we're going to properly UV unwrap that. Now it is a cylinder. It is a closed, thick cylinder. You remember that we used the solidify modifier, so it's this shape here, which means that I need to add in a seam at one end right there. So you want to add it in a place which isn't going to be viewable to the viewer, to the camera, wherever the camera is going to be, which in this case is about here. And then I'm going to add in a seam right there, because you want to add one lengthways as well. So add in a seam there. And then the same for the thruster. So which is, whoops, it's that one right there. Select the seam, there we go. And then this part here, which I don't know the name of still, but I'm going to call it the wing connector. The wing, the stuff that holds the engine to the plane. This is essentially a cube, but it's got the faces missing from it. So all I need to do is just add in one seam right there. Okay, so then just do the exact same thing over here as we just did before. Awesome. Great, and the final one right about there. Excellent. So now select everything, hit Control L. Now if I hit U and then select unwrap, you can see that we now have everything nicely unwrapped. Now you'll see in the top corner there it says object has a non-uniform scale, which means if you go out of edit mode, you actually have a look at our model, you'll see that the scaling, you can see that this is all out of whack. The X, the Y, Z. Ideally these should all be 1. So you want to hit Control A, apply the scale. Now they all say 1. Now when you UV unwrap that again, guess what happens? Ta-da! You actually get some better looking results. Everything looks a lot more nicer, except for these parts, which is the wing connector piece, right? So I'm just going to fix these up. So essentially, this part right here that I'm doing, the fix up part, This all depends on how you're going to be using, what sort of texturing that you're going to be doing. Now in this case, for the connecting part, like I might add a seam that goes down, you know, like horizontally, like across there. So I want to be able to make sure this is all straight so that I can do that. And by the way, if anybody knows of an easier way to do this, please let me know. This is how I always do it. I hit S, X, 0, enter. And that's how I've always done it. And I'm sure there has to be a better way to do it, because I do this for like absolutely everything. And then I do the same thing. S, Y. Oh, hang on, what happened there? S, Y, 0. And it straightens it all out. If you do proper UV unwrapping, then you shouldn't actually even have this problem. But alas, we have sort of been lazy, or I've been lazy. So we sort of have to do a little bit of fixing up. So same thing, this is the thruster, the back part of our engine here. So again, we're not going to be adding too much detail to it, but it would help if these lines are straight, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a seam. I mean, I'm going to add in a line like basically down here, and that's going to be able to add us, like paint in some detail if we wanted. Okay, piece by piece, whoops. Whoop, 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 okay. Now, if we're lucky, these will actually line up exactly. And then what we will have is that we won't actually need to do anything. Yeah, no, it doesn't line up pretty. We can sort of fix it up like that. It doesn't really matter all that much. Anyway, that's pretty spot on. Now, for these ones here, this is the actual main engine part here. So this just needs to, yeah, this one actually lines up pretty well. I mean, it's not exact, but it's close enough that we can sort of get away with it. You could fiddle around with that a little bit more, but really it does not matter that much at all. Anyways, the reason I'm putting them over the top of one another, by the way, is just because the engines are identical and they're going to be textured identically. So it makes sense, and also saves you room in this white box, because the white box is all we have to work with. It just saves you room, and it saves you time from having to double texture everything. So that's why I'm placing them directly over one another. And the size that you make these, by the way, again, depends on how much detail is going to be in that area. So because I want there to be a little bit of detail in the engine, because that's going to be sort of a little bit more viewable to the viewer, I want to make that a little bit bigger. Okay, now bring everything back, and that's what we've got. So if we want to, we can actually take our engine here and sort of scale this up, make it a bit bigger, and that'll give us a bit more room. It's probably a bit too big, but you know, sort of just play around with it until you've got something that you're pretty happy with. Okay, cool. So we've made ample use of our room here, and everything is looking pretty good. Now, there is one more problem, which is that when we did project from view from side on, it worked pretty well. Like the plane lengthways is pretty good. However, this top part, the top and the bottom, we're missing some detail, because you can see there's only a tiny little gap between that point there and that point there. But if you look at it from top down, you'll notice that it's the same size face there as it is from the side. So really, we're missing out on a lot of detail along the top there, which means if we wanted to add in any sort of detail later on, then it would be a problem. This is why project from view generally doesn't work for something like this. But I found a method to sort of correct that. And that's if that you just hit Alt and then select on that edge there. We've now selected the entire loop cut from top to bottom. And what we can do, like this, and I might also just deselect that area there. And also the nose. I found that the nose doesn't really do this part very well. Okay. Then, if I hit S, then Y, then I can bring that out like that. But because I want it to also affect some of the vertices around it, I'm going to turn on proportional editing like that by pressing O, and then set it to sharp. And then if I go S, then Y, then you want to scale this down just using your mouse wheel. Just turn it down until it's only affecting the vertices that you want. Now, ideally, you want the size of these faces to be the exact same size as these ones right in the center there. And that can be harder than it sounds. But something like that is a lot more accurate, and it's gonna look a lot nicer. And then I'm just gonna do the exact same thing right here for the front part of our plane. But I just found from experience, you need to sort of do this area just all on its own, sort of separately, because anyways, that's fine right there. And then the same with the tail. This part here, it can sort of get out of whack if you sort of do it all as one. So if I just drag that out, there we go, a little bit more. There we go. Awesome. Oh, hang on. All right. Okay. Okay, good. Awesome. Now the tail itself, you'll see there's like a little sort of a line here. Now that's because we actually have, down the middle of our tail here, we have some faces, which you can't actually see because we did project from view. So what we can do, let's just select everything, turn off proportional editing. And then if I just grab these, like that, and then I can turn off proportional editing again. I can just pull these up. And that will allow us, if we wanted to, it would allow us more detail. So we could add some detail to this middle part right here, which could come in handy later on. But anyways, that is pretty good right there. Now this wing here, this side flap, that doesn't actually matter because the texturing we're going to do is we're just going to make a big blue line that goes all the way from like the tip all the way down up there. So we want this flap here to be blue anyway, so it doesn't matter. We're just going to leave it as is. So that is all fine. It's all fine and dandy. Excellent. So if you're happy with how everything is, now is the time to actually UV unwrap things. So it's sort of like you have to make sure everything is perfect before you do it, because once you've UV unwrapped it and you take it into Photoshop or GIMP, you don't want to get halfway through texturing before realizing like, oh, the model is, you know, it would be better if I'd done this or something like that, because then you have to retexture everything. But don't panic. Don't sort of get like held up on trying to figure out everything first. A lot of it's sort of experimentation. Provided you have something that looks something like this, you should be fine. Okay, so to export it, you go UVs. Try that again. UVs. Export UV layout. And then you can see I already made a folder here. This is the second time I've tried recording this tutorial. You then just want to go to a folder by itself and then just give it a name. So I've called mine UV because it's now going to overwrite my old one. And then you want to check all UVs and then just make sure these sizes are okay. Fill opacity, I generally just leave all of these as default. And then I'm going to hit export UV layout. That's going to take a little while and that's perfect. Okay, now that should be done. Now, what you want to do is go over to Photoshop or GIMP. It's up to you. This is one that I've done earlier. And then go ahead and find that image that you've just created. So this is it right here. Ta-da! So that's what you should have if you've done it correctly. So you can see there's sort of like a faint outline of our layout here, and then the rest of it's transparent, so that's deliberate. What I'm going to do is I'm just making a new layer. I'm placing it underneath our UV layer here, our UV coordinates, and then I'm just going to hit Control backspace, whatever, and that just paints the whole thing white, okay? All right, so this is where we are. Now this is I should just probably label this. I'll just call this UV layout. And I'm now going to lock that layer just so that I can't move it or paint on it by accident. Okay. All right. Now this is the fun part. So this is where we actually start doing the texturing. Now the first thing we're going to tackle is the windows and the doors. So this is where our blueprint will come in handy, which is why I've loaded it up already. So you can see, you know, going from the top to bottom, there is quite a few windows and quite a few doors. Now, from experience, I found that the best size for a window is, first of all, I have to set this right. So I'm going to set the fill color to be black and the stroke to be 0. And this is a rounded rectangle, by the way, rounded rectangular tool. And I'm giving the rounded area 5 pixels, okay? Now, again, this is sort of hard for people that don't have Photoshop, but I'm sure GIMP allows you to do just the same thing, but the tools are probably called different things. But anyways, Okay, so I found from experience that the best size for a window is about 14 pixels wide, like that. And then if I go up here, I can actually adjust this, and then 18 pixels high. Okay, now actually that's probably, I think because I've sort of scaled this up, it's probably a little bit too small. So I'm just going to go 1620. Okay, that's sort of about the right height for a window. Right size for a window, okay? Okay, so now this is sort of like the tricky part. You want to figure out how high is the window. Now this is where the wing is, right here. This is where the wing actually starts. So if we have a look at our blueprint right here, you can see that the wing starts about here where my mouse cursor is, and then it goes up to about there. So sort of about from there to there. So you want to have a look, at this and go from there to there. Is probably, yeah, it's probably around about there. Okay, it's a bit of guesswork, but it should be fine. And then I'm going to slide that all the way to the front, because believe it or not, I didn't know this, but the window, look at that. The window starts like right at the nose. So if this plane was to crash, that guy in first class or whatever, he's the first one to go. It's just, it's tough luck, I guess. I don't know. Actually, is people safer in the back of the plane or the front? I think it's actually the back, isn't it? Yeah, it's got to be the back. That would make a lot more sense. I don't know. When you're on a roller coaster, the people at the back get more whiplash or whatever. I don't know how it works. Hopefully, I never have to experience a plane crash. That would be good. All right, so once you're pretty confident that you've got the right height, because it's sort of hard to guess, because you've got lines and stuff going everywhere, but they don't really mean anything. Anyways, we then just want to go and duplicate our window. And I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to use the right arrow key, like that, until I've got a gap like that. And then I'm just going to duplicate it again. And there we go. So, how many windows do we have to do? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Is it 14? Yes, it's 14 windows. I believe I counted it before. Let me just check that again. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes, it's 14. Okay. For a minute there, I thought it was 15. All right. So I can now duplicate those 3. Now we have 6. Duplicate those 6. And now we have 12. And then if I duplicate the last 2, then of course, what do we have? What's 2 plus 12? It's 14. My parents are both math teachers, so they're always just throwing out random sums for me to to try and guess the answer. I don't know. They're in a business of teaching math. They're starting up their own website and everything. So I don't know, whatever. I always just feel stupid because I can never get the right answer. All right. Now, if you're in Photoshop, I recommend that you start putting these windows into different folders, because otherwise you're going to get a huge mess of rectangles and you're not going to know which one is which. Okay. So I've created a folder called Front Windows. Okay. And then having a look at our blueprint here, you can see we've got a door and then the windows start again. Now, how many are these windows right here? We got 3, 6, 9, 10, another 14. Isn't that handy? So I'm just going to duplicate that entire group and leave a gap about there. That's pretty good. And then I'll just call this Windows 2. Okay, now for the door itself. Okay, this one is cool. This is where sort of having Photoshop can come in handy, because it's really easy to create a rectangular shape or whatever shape with a stroke value. So what I do is I set the fill to be nothing, and then I set the stroke to be black. Okay, and then I just draw in a door like that, and that's it. So that's pretty much all you need to do. But you want to sort of compare it with our reference image there. Basically, the door is sort of like halfway, like, you know, vertically. Like the window is like dead center in the middle of the door. And then the width of it is sort of up to your discretion. But I think it's something, you know, let's see. What's the gap between the window? Okay, there's a bit more of a gap. Let's go a bit over. Okay, that's about there. And then there's a bit of a gap between where the door starts, the windows. Something like that. Okay, that's cool. And then there needs to be a window actually in the door as well. So if I just drag this window all the way to the top there and pull that across, I now have a window in my door. Ta-da! So I'm going to call this one door. I'm going to call this one window door. And one other thing that you can't actually see in our blueprint over here, but you can see if you have a look at some reference photos. CC copyright to Sebastian Fuzz. I don't know if I actually have to audibly say that, whatever. You can see here, there's like what looks like a sort of a line and then a little hole in it. Now I believe, I'm no genius, but I think that is the door handle of which the plane is opened. So that's not a good picture. That's not a good picture. There you go. You can sort of see a little bit more clearly here, like right where my cursor is. Yeah, there's a line, there's a little hole in it. So to do that in Photoshop, all I'm going to do is make a new layer, and then just using the brush tool, set it to hardness of extreme, whatever, 100%. And then I'm just going to draw a line. It's probably a little bit too thin. Just draw a line down there. That's pretty cool. And then like that. And there we go. Now that's our little door. That's probably a little bit too big and a little bit too over the top, but it'll suit us just fine. It's the door handle. And then I'm gonna make a little folder just for that one as well. You know, it's funny, I was watching, I was on the plane on the way back from Australia. I was going to Korea, which is where I am right now. And I was going through like the in-flight entertainment, and there was this program called, what is it, like The Secret Lives of the Rich People, or I don't know, whatever it was. And it was just like a show about all the extravagance of rich people living in Miami and whatever. And there's this company that takes like private planes and then customizes them. Anyways, the show was about, by the way, just so I'm not just ragging on about nothing, there's 10 windows that go up here at the top. So I'm just going to now do that. Anyways, the show was talking, anyways, it got like a bunch of people, it got a company that customizes people's private planes. And so what they were doing was adding in, you know, stupid things like alligator leather on the toilet seats in the private plane. One of them had like a home theater system set up, like it was an actual cinema inside a plane. And other ones, they just wanted just like jewels in the middle of tables and stuff like that. And they wanted this and they wanted that. And I realized right then and there that a lot of rich people have really poor taste in interior decoration. Like some of it just, I don't know, to me looked extremely dated. That's the only way I can put it. It was just like, I don't know, it's like what I imagine a fancy hotel looked like in the 80s or 90s. But I don't know, these people wanted it and they paid, you know, $1 million or whatever to customize their plane to look like that, but whatever. Anyways, the way I'm positioning these windows right now is I'm just going like reference, door. You can see there's 2 windows here before this next window starts. So 2 down, there we go. It's about in the right place. And how high are those windows? This is the edge of the cockpit, and it sort of goes pretty much dead on to the bottom of right there. So if I just increase that to there we go. That's about the right height now. Okay, now you just want to go along and continue doing that for the rest of the plane. It's a little bit finicky and it just takes a little bit of time, but essentially it's just adding in the windows, counting the windows, making sure there's the gaps in the right places, the doors in the right places, making sure it's all done, and it should be a piece of cake. So this area here, by the way, you can't really see how many windows there are, which is why I recommend you go on Flickr and just have a look. Just type in 747 and you'll find images like this one by Sebastian Fuzz, and you can actually count the number of windows in the area where the blueprint doesn't tell you. But anyways, I'm going to pause the recording whilst I do this, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Yeah, how you like that? So that's it. Windows everywhere, doors complete. Everything is matching the blueprint, which is a success. Have a coffee break. I don't know. All right, so we got it all in place. Now comes the fun part, which is we're actually going to try and see how it looks on the finished model, right? So what you want to do is you want to hide the layer with your UV image layout, whatever. That's always a common mistake. A lot of people forget that. When I say a lot of people, I'm generally referring to myself. And then you want to save it as a PNG. PNG in particular, because if you don't save it as a PNG, in particular with bump mapping, JPEGs get all sorts of crazy artifacts and they look absolutely horrible. So I'm just going to call this a very imaginative name, Windows and Doors. Okay, and then we're going to go over to our model right here, which has been, of course, UV unwrapped. And I'm going to change this to the node editor. Now this would be a good time to change it from the Blender internal rendering engine to the Cycles rendering engine. That's a good time. All right, so go ahead, give it a new material, and I'm going to call this plane exterior. Okay, and this one here, this is the windshield. So if you want to call it that, you're welcome to as well. We'll add the material for that later. All right, we're just focusing on the plane exterior for now. So the plane is, of course, not completely diffused. In fact, very few objects in real life actually are. Pretty much everything is a mix of diffuse and gloss. Well, not everything, but you know what I mean. Most materials. Even if they look diffused, they are generally they have some tiny amount of gloss to it. So in this case, quite a lot of gloss. So I'm going to set this mix shader to 0.15. The higher you set this to, the more gloss you get. So 0.15 gives us, you know, mostly diffused with a little bit of gloss to it. Okay, and now we can go ahead and add in an image texture, which is, of course, Windows and Doors, the image that we just created. And for the sake of just previewing it, I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the diffuse input. Now at this point, we can go ahead actually if you want to. Let's just do some quick rendering here. Let's set the samples to 50, and let's go performance-wise 256, 256. Pretty sure these are going to become the defaults in the future anyway. Whatever. And I'm going to save this as well, just in case I want to go back. All right. Okay, so there's no lighting at all, but you can sort of see, oh, this is terrible. I was trying to get away without doing the lighting yet, but all right, let's just do the lighting, okay? Lighting is pretty easy. We just got a sun lamp, like this, and then it's just tilted like that. And the reason it's tilted like that, I'm working backwards, is because of our background image, all right? Now, the background image is one that I found off of Flickr, and you can get it right here. It's called Sea of Clouds, Mexico, by Chris Ford. So this is a Creative Commons image. Go ahead, download that, and yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and bring that into the scene. Now, if you just bring it in and like put it on a plane, it's not going to match the plane correctly. So something that I always use is something called the import images as planes add-on. So once you go ahead and check that, then you'll be able to go File, Import Images as Planes. And then what you need to do is just locate that image wherever it is. By the way, when you're choosing it, if you're not going to go with this image, it's worth experimenting with a lot of different skies to see which one works for your scene. You can see I've tried a lot of different ones here, and I think I actually tried more than what is actually on display here. I tried a lot. I scrolled through hundreds and hundreds of different sky backgrounds to see what would work for the scene. It really, it'll make a huge impact on how the final result will look. So I highly recommend just have a look at lots of images before you decide on one. So anyways, I've imported that now. I set it as emission type in the options, which you just saw. And I'm just going to rotate this, put it in the backdrop right here. And we don't have a camera. All right, so let's position our camera. Add a camera for starters, and then let's go Control Alt number pad 0, and that's just going to drop in the camera right at that point right there. And you can see that it's sort of disappearing into the background there, so you want to set the end to be longer than it currently is. So something like that is good, maybe a little bit higher so we can get a little bit more detail of the plane. Okay, that's good. And then this plane over here, not that plane, this plane, I'm working with two planes. You want it to be exactly like dead on to what the camera's viewing. So if you turn on limits for the camera, then that'll give you a much better idea of where to actually position your plane. So if I position it over here, and I rotate that so it's like dead on with the angle of the camera, and then going side view, position that to be about there, and then about there, and then I just rotate that up like that. And now if I scale that up, it should be pretty dead on. I can see it's a little bit off. Just gonna rotate that, scale it down, and there we go. Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and save that. And now, oh, with your sun as well, you wanna go ahead and set the strength of that to 5. And also the world settings. You wanna go ahead and use that same image you've got for the backdrop there and use it as an environment texture. So go ahead and just add that again. Actually, it should be just right here, shouldn't it? Yeah, there we go. So add that in, leave the strength as 1, and that's just going to give us some subtle reflections coming from the plane. Anyways, all that talking done, let's go ahead, give it a render. Ta-da! And look at that. So the windows actually look pretty on par with the scale of the plane. They're perhaps a smidge too big, but nothing to worry about. It's pretty good, and it's looking great. Okay, so that's great. Now, windows aren't actually black. We did that just so we could actually see how it looks on the model. Windows are glass, obviously. So it would make sense that instead of it appearing as black, it actually appears as glass. So because our image is black and white, we can actually use this in and basically make it apply to whatever. I'll just show you, okay? So if we add in a mix shader right here, drop this in right there, and then down here, if I add in, I don't know, let's just go glass, okay? Drop this in there, and then if I take this input and then put that into the factor input like that, then what you'll find is that the whole plane should become glass. So you want to flip those two around, make sure that the glass is on top, and now those windows have actually become glass. Now the trouble with having this just as glass is that the glass shader doesn't really work for this sort of thing. You can do a whole bunch of stuff which I've done in the past for the Architecture Academy, such as using a light path node and all that extra stuff. It's a lot of extra work and doesn't really have much of a payoff. There is something that was brought to my attention by Sebastian Koenig, invented I think by Bassam Kodeli. It's sort of like a cheap, effective way of getting glass. It's not accurate. It's not something I would recommend using for, you know, anything you want to get like realistic results. If the glass is up close, then this is not a good way to do it. But in this case, this will actually work fine. So what we're doing is we're just taking a transparent and glossy shader, and then we're just combining those two together. And make sure that the glossy shader roughness is set to 0, so it's actually shiny like glass. And then you'll see that it's actually, it looks a little bit closer to what glass should look like. And you can sort of increase, you know, how much, you know, gloss or transparency you get. So the higher you set this to, the more gloss you actually get. So I think somewhere around about that value, or maybe 0.2, should give us some pretty good results, but something like that. So again, in this example, this style of glass works pretty well. I wouldn't recommend it for, you know, architectural scenes or realism, but it works cool for this scene. Awesome. All right, now the other thing that we want to use this texture for is for bump mapping. Because the windows, we want to make them actually look like they're like bumped into, like actually like there's some geometry to it, so that they're actually like wedged into the plane, okay, not painted on. So the way we're going to do that is by adding in a bump node right here, and then connecting the output from our image texture and putting that into the height input, and then taking the normal and putting that in both the diffuse and the glossy right there. Now you can see that that's far too much, so you want to turn down the strength of this to be 0.2. And what you'll get is a very subtle amount of bump right around those. Okay, oh, and also you want to set this to non-color data, and then you'll get more realistic bump as well. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. That's actually pretty spot on. So let's go ahead, give this a little test render right now. Let's see how the scene looks. Hey, what do you know? It actually looks pretty cool. Awesome. So this is actually how like planes look before they're sold to airlines. Like if you look on Flickr for like 747 images, there's like a plane before it's been painted. It's just purely white like this, and it just looks weird. It looks so strange. It looks unsafe for some unknown reason to me. a plane without painting or whatever on it just looks unsafe. Anyways. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next part, which is adding in the color, the decal. This is the fun part, right? So you get to add in your own business name or whatever you want to call your airline. So what we want to do is we want to hide all of our doors and windows. So I'm going to put them in a separate folder. Hide all of that. And yeah, we can get started on the color. Okay. Now for the color of this, really what I want to do, we'll turn on the doors and windows just so we can see how things are going to look. Having a look at my finished result right here, what I decided on was I had this blue, sort of a little bit of a gradient effect going underneath the plane and then working its way up towards the wing there. I had a look at a lot of different airlines to see what sort of styles they went for, and generally I found that they went for sort of like a paint theme where it was mostly white and then you had it sort of taking over the back part of the plane. Anyways, every airline is different, but this is one that I found from experimenting, I found it looked kind of nice, so that's what I went with. So all we need to do now is basically paint that in. So the color that I'm going to choose is of course a blue. I don't want it to be fully saturated or fully bright, like that's too much. So something about there, I think is, let me just see, compare that to the one over here. Oh, maybe a little bit bluer, and there, that's pretty good. Okay, and then I'm going to hit B to bring up the brush tool, and then I want to give this a very soft brush. And then just starting at the tip here, I'm just painting all the way down. Whoops. It's the thing, if you restart recontinue the brush, you should have to make sure that it doesn't look like there's a jagged edge there, if you know what I mean. Okay, and just slowly all the way up there. So you just want to make it just look slick, you know? Make it look like it was designed by a multi-billion-dollar company, you know? It's something I've learned, actually. I was listening to the Planet Money podcast, talking about the economies of all sorts of different industries. Very interesting podcast. Anyways, interviewing like a bunch of airplane companies or whatever. And they did a whole story on how hard it is to actually run your own airline, and how like new companies come up all the time and thinking like, right, I'm going to start my own airline, and they start it, and then they always go bankrupt. It's just like, it's one of the hardest businesses to actually maintain, because there's so much competition with it. There's so many regulations, and it's just like, it's incredibly hard to actually run it successfully, which is scary, you know. I don't know, the Russell, what's his name? I was gonna say Russell Brand, but that's not his name. The Virgin guy, that guy, he's pretty successful. He knows how to do it. Anyways, you can see I'm just sort of painting over it, just trying to make it look like it's one continuous line from top to sort of bottom, like that. And that is, okay, not quite right there. Up to there. Okay, that's pretty good. As good as it's going to get, I say. All right, so now in my window that's off screen that you can't actually see, I've got Illustrator open with my new logo, which is freshly designed by a logo designer. Anyways, this little guy right here. And I'm just going to add this in right here. And this is where you can have fun with the design, really. You can add in your own name. You can add in your own face if you want to. That'd be cool if somebody makes a plane with their face on it. I want to see that. Somebody send me a render of that. That'd be cool. Because it would look so tacky. I can imagine like an airline actually doing that. You know how like some business owners, they get, I don't know, the only way to describe it I can think is like just for pure ego's sake, they use their name in the title of the business. They call it like Bob's Fishing Store, you know, whatever. But I saw this one in Australia. It was a printing company. I don't remember the name of it. It doesn't really matter. But they had a full, like on the back of a bus, they'd paid for a full logo for their printing company. So what would you imagine that they would do for their, you know, what would they pay for to put on the back of it? If you wanted to advertise to somebody to come to a printing store and buy printer ink, what would you put on there? Maybe some sort of some marketing, like I don't know, showing statistics of what the cost of ink is and how much you're losing, or I don't know, something clever. I can't think of it right now, but you know what they did? This guy just had a photo of himself and I think his wife, and it was just him on the back of a bus, and then in the background was like a few printer cartridges, and it was just like him just standing there, and it said like, "Come to Printers World," and he was like barely smiling, and I just thought like, oh, come on, man, come on. I don't know, I've seen it quite a lot. There's a few companies in Korea that have done it as well, and I think like you've got to remove yourself or your ego from a company. I think that's sort of key. Says the guy that refuses to have anybody do tutorials on his website, right? I'm actually thinking of allowing that, by the way, in case anybody's curious. Allowing new tutors to do tutorials on Blender Guru. That's something that I am seriously considering. Let me know how you feel about that in the comments or something. All right, I gotta hide something here. I can't see what's going on. All right, there we go. So this is another thing I noticed with the airplanes, the airplane companies. They always have like half their logo on the tail. And because I'm not creative enough to think of something cooler, I'm just copying them. That's all I do. Copy, and there we go. Pull that back. Turn off the doors and windows. Let's toggle this. Logo tail. All right. Okay, so that is pretty good. You can add in more detail, more or less detail if you want. I think for mine as well, I added in a using the Myriad Pro font. Where is that thing? It's always hiding. Myriad Pro. I love Myriad Pro. It's like my favorite font. I use it for absolutely everything. But I noticed that every plane has like something like this. AP. There you go. There's me throwing my ego into the plane some more. Talking about egos before, and here I am. Biggest accuser of it. It's my initials, of course. But yeah, they always have like a model number. Just like some like two letters and then some digits or whatever. I guess, I don't know, it just helps for the realism. So that's what I'm doing, and we can go ahead then and turn off, of course, the rest of it. Okay, go ahead and turn that off. So now, go ahead and save as, and I'm going to call this color. Well, actually, let's just call it Decal, because that's what it is, really. Okay, that's saving. There we go. All right. For some reason, Photoshop makes noises sometimes, but that's all right. And back we go. Okay, so now we want to add that into the input of our diffuse right here. So we just need to add in a new image texture. Go textures, tutorial, decal, drag it in, ta-da, and look at that. We have a wonderful looking thing. Look, see, the blue is off. It's like it's too fluoro. Anyways, you can adjust that however you wish. And I think the tail sort of looks a little strange the way it's sort of painted on there, but again, this is some stuff that is like fine tuning that is not tutorial material, sort of stuff you do for homework. So play around with it and have fun with designing your own plane. That's as much I'm going to do for the decaling. Now what we're going to do is add in the materials for the other objects. So basically, looking at our scene here, we want to have a silver strip along the edge of this wing, which is something that I've noticed that pretty much every single 747 has, because it's I don't know, it's a fashion. I have no idea. Excuse me, just have to get a drink of water. So we're going to add in that material, and thankfully, because of how we've modeled this, it's actually quite easy to do. We just have to select the vertices like this, one by one, and and we're on a roll. And then what we're going to do is create a separate material and then simply assign it to these vertices. We don't have to do any more of that fiddling around with, you know, in Photoshop or whatever. Actually, we will have to do some of that later on. We're going to add in some bump mapping, but that's pretty quick to do and it's pretty fun. I say fun a lot, but really, come on, it's work. It's I don't know, I guess it's one of those things like I think because if you do it as a job, it can sort of remove the excitement and the discovery of it. Once you've practiced making a scene like 5 times in a row, it could sort of become a little bit of a chore. I don't know why I'm talking like all this down stuff in the middle of a tutorial. All right, so I've just selected all of these vertices right here. So we're going to give it a new material, and I'm going to call it Wing Silver. And I'm going to go mix shader. Why is it always mixed up? Mix shader, and then diffuse, and then glossy. I swear that is going to be fixed in the next update. I swear it has to be. There's no way they can keep that. Look at that. What is that? Everything is in an order to keep you guessing, it seems like. But anyways, just to make sure that we can tell the difference between everything else, I'm just making the viewport color the same as that. And I'm going to hit assign. And there we go. We now have a nice silver edge to it. And yeah, it's all fine and dandy. So let's have a look at that with the rendering. And that's pretty good, actually. It's perhaps a little bit too shiny, so maybe I'll make it a little bit more diffused. But that's pretty good. Now, generally there's a lot more texture in the on real planes. Like you'll have like bumps and, you know, little bits of stuff that's, you know, been caked on after a lot of years of flying the plane, and it's picked up all sorts of goo and stuff like that. And that can really help sell the realism for your plane. So it's something you might want to consider. It's something I'm actually considering working on. There's funnily enough, surprised me, but there's a publisher that actually wants to use this image of this plane in a book. Something about CG vehicles or something like that. He saw it on CG Society, and then he sent me an email about it. Which, I don't know, it's surprised me because it's really not something that I've spent that long on. And I wouldn't feel good if I sent it off as is. So I'm probably going to do like a lot more work on this scene before I send it off to him to be published or whatever. Adding in a lot more detail and stuff like that. Probably adding in lots of textures along that wing there and stuff. But anyways, I don't know why I'm yakking on about this. That looks weird, doesn't it? That looks really weird. So I don't think this part here should actually have that material. So let's just turn that all off. Set this back to be the plane. There we go. That should look a lot better. Okay. It doesn't really. It's... I don't know why. Oh, okay. Maybe that's why. Got to probably turn up a crease right there. There we go. Now it's actually... it'll hug it a bit better. That's something you have to be aware of when you're assigning materials to different vertices. The crease will affect it. Like the subsurf modifier, that's going to really affect like how far that material goes. So just keep that in mind. All right, so everything is pretty good right now. Everything is sort of in order. The other thing we need to do is add a material to our engines and the part that connects the engine to the plane down here. So I found generally the color of this right here. This is generally the color of whatever is underneath the plane. So having a look, I'll just show you some quick reference. That's not a good quick reference. All right, there we go. So it's basically, yeah, it's whatever the plane, that the color of this underneath here is. This is sort of a grayish color like that. And you can see also the amount of like detail, like little rivets, little lines, all sorts of little panels and all sorts of stuff like that. That's a lot of work. If you want to go ahead and really get detailed, you can paint that in. I'm going to do a tiny little bit later on, but just letting you know, looking at a reference photo like this, this is sort of how much detail is in a real engine, but you can get away with a lot less, which is what we're trying to do really. So I'm going to give this a new material, a mix shader, again, going to diffuse, and then glossy, And then let's just set this to be the color of this, like that. But I don't like how like fluoro it is, so I'm going to turn down the saturation and the value. I don't know, that's probably too much. There we go, something like that. Let's see how that looks. And yeah, a little bit less. Yeah, that's probably going to be pretty good. And I'll just set the viewport color. And let's call this airplane blue, like that. All right, and I'll hit assign, and there we go. And do the exact same thing with this one over here. Hit assign, and there we go. All right, now same thing goes for the engine right here. So this engine, as well as this engine over here, we can hit assign on those. But the tip of the engine, always the tip of it, has a silver ring around it. So that is pretty much a custom. I'm pretty sure it's because it needs extra, I don't know. I'm going to say something embarrassing because I'm not an engineer, but maybe the silver gives it extra strength. I'm just trying to come up with a reason as to why every single plane would have a silver ring at the front of it. And that's the only reason I can come up with. So yeah, so I'm just assigning that same silver wing color. I'm just assigning it to that front there, and then tightening it with a crease using Shift E, and that's going to give it a nicer look like that. And then for our thruster at the back here, this one needs to be a separate material by itself. Let's just copy the wing silver, just so that we can save time using a mix shader again. Let's just call this gun metal, right? And let's go give it a sort of a little bit of a darkish color like that. Okay, a lot more roughness. That's good. And I'm gonna hit let's first of all set this color. Hit assign on that. And now the back part of it, this is even darker. So if I go gunmetal, and let's call this gunmetal darker. Let's just make this a little bit darker. And then hit assign on that one. And to show you what I mean, like the different colors of that, have a look here. So this is one part of the thruster, and then that's the back part. So it's a little bit darker, a little bit blacker. So that's why I've done that. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing over here. It's kind of annoying having two of everything when it comes to these engines here. You have to do everything twice, but not to worry, it's not too much of a hassle. And that's all good. I think this should look fine, in which case we can get on. Yeah, that's probably a little bit too dark for my liking. Let's just turn that up a little bit. Same with this one here. I think it should be fine, and we can basically just jump over to the bump mapping. Yep, it looks good. Excellent. So for the bump mapping, let's have a look at some reference photos again here. So basically all over the plane, you can't really see it well on this one. Let's have a look at some other photos down here. These are all Creative Commons images on the old Flickr. Let's load these up here. But as I'm sure you can notice, hey, that is cool. Merry Christmas plane. It's kind of cool. Oh, there we go. That's the naked plane I was telling you about. It looks white. Doesn't that look unsafe? Imagine climbing into that thing. I don't know. It just doesn't look right. And that is wrong. Anyways, let's have a look at some of these close-ups here. All along the plane, I mean, obviously, when they're making a plane, it has to be made out of physical materials. I don't think there's a printer out there that prints metal the size of this. So it has to be made up of separate sheets. So there's little lines and sheets across everything. Now, like, it's better viewed actually in this one. You can see all of the little lines and all the little details and stuff like that. But basically, I'm not going to focus too much on the actual this part of the plane because it's not that viewable from the camera. But the wing itself, generally, the little lines and the little bits along it, it's a lot more visible. So it helps if we actually have those little lines and rivets on the sides of the plane. Sorry, on the actual wing itself. This is a sort of better view. Maybe that one there as well. There you go. So you can see there's a lot of lines going down it like that. Lots of grunge and stuff. If you wanted to add in that detail, you can as well. So I'm just going to do that in using our UV layout. So we've just added in all the color, all the decals. So let's just call that decal. Put that all in that group and then hide it. Okay, so the lines. This is really easy to do, super easy. We just take a brush and I'm going to set the thickness to be 2 pixels, and then I'm going to set the hardness at 100%. And let's give this, there we go, and let's call this panels. Okay, so that's what it looks like, right? Now what I do is I take the lines that are already on our UV image, on our UV layout, and then holding down Shift, I just draw down them like this. Because I found from having a look at reference photos of different, wings and stuff like that, generally, like where there's a cut in our mesh, because it was easy for us to, to model it like that, generally there's a cut in real life as well. So I found that to be, like pretty helpful. So, and what I'm doing now is I'm just going to draw down this center line here, which is just going to add in a little bit more detail. And you will notice that this actually won't be that viewable from the camera, which is why I'm not spending too long on too much of this, like doing the entire plane and all of these little details, because for one, that would just eat up a lot of time of the tutorial. But it's not that viewable. It's not that noticeable from the camera point of view. So I'm just going to do a little bit. So just like this, little lines, and this is going to be used, by the way, I should have explained, as a bump map, just like we did for the windows and doors and stuff. We're going to use this as a bump map, and that's going to help to make it look cool. So that's pretty good. If you wanted to, you could add a separate one here, maybe another one up here, because this is where the wing sort of, like over here, this is where the wing becomes a flat, but there's always like, a little bit of detail there or whatever, and they added a whole bunch of it. You saw the reference photos before. Anyways, now at this point, you can add in some rivets, and I'll do that in a sec, but first I want to actually draw a line down where the engine is. So having a look at our image here, let's go to the UV image editor. There we go. Okay, so I want to find out, because basically I want to have a line that goes sort of around there. So having a look at a reference photo again, let's bring it back. There we go. We've got 2 lines right down the middle there. So I want a line between there and there. So where is that in everything? It's that part right there. Okay, so I need a line that goes from here to here, and another line from here to here. Well, this is sort of why it helps to make the vertices straight as you're actually UV unwrapping them, because of scenarios exactly like this, where we want it to be a straight line, but because this is curved, it's going to make a weird looking line. Anyways, that's the best I can do, just, with the time constraints we've got. But obviously, you can add a bit more detail if you want. And then I'm also going to add in a line here, having a look at our image. Actually, you don't really even need it, but anyways, let's just do that anyway. And this part here, let's just add in a couple of lines going that way. Actually, is that the correct? Gotta check this out. Let's set this to be, whoops. Okay, so it is that way. So in that case, it needs to be there to there, up there, I guess. Okay, so this is a way of just adding a little bit of detail. Like, this isn't exact, it's not, it's not perfect, and it's something that, you could and probably should spend a little bit more time on it than I am right now. But again, I'm trying to do it at a speed to not bore you. And also, it's, a tutorial that shows you everything in, like, 19 parts of a video. You're not learning as much. If there's some homework to do, you generally learn a lot more. So what I'm doing right now is actually adding in some rivets. I'm doing that in Photoshop very easily just by adding in more spacing. And you can see it's very easy, very cool. You just drag a line all along those, and we just add in little rivets along everything for all of these lines one by one. So to save time, I'm just going to pause the video and show you what it looks like when I've finished. And there we go. So everything is done. We've got all the little rivets over everything, and we can now go ahead and create the image. So we've now just got all the lines. I'm going to go ahead, save this as a new image. What are we going to call it? Panels. There we go. And come back into Blender over here. So because we've already got a bump map over plain exterior, there we go. We've got a bump already at this point right here. So what I'm going to do is just at this point, because we've got a bump map already, I'm going to add in a new image texture, and this one is going to be, of course, the panels. And you can't like double up on these. You can't add in like two bump nodes in together. So we have to combine this and this together. So I'm going to set this to non-color data, as you should with bump mapping. And then I'm going to add in a mix RGB node right here. Drag that in. And because we're working with black and white, we want to mix them together with a multiply amount. So something like that. Now, if we did that, we probably wouldn't see much effect because there's very little over this plane which actually has that bump mapping to it. But on the wing silver, we need to add in that bump mapping again because it is a separate material. I was doing this before when I was practicing this scene, and I couldn't figure out why the bump mapping wasn't turning out on the wing or anything else. And I realized because I'd only applied it to the plane exterior. But of course, this is a separate material right here. So we have to add it to everything, all of these, which has the bump mapping. But I'm going to show you a little trick to make it easier on you. So just add in a bump right here. Set it to height. And let's drag this across. Oop, right there. And let's set the strength to be 0.2. And non-color data. Now, because we have to apply this to a lot of materials down here, I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to hit Control G. And that's going to make it its own separate group. And just to make this a little bit cleaner, I'm going to delete one of these outputs right there. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it panel bump. Like that. And now check out this. You go to the airplane blue and then group panel bump. And now I just need to drag that out over to there. Pretty easy. So that just saves you a bit of time. It's something, and also the other cool thing about it is that if I open up this group and I change one of these settings, it's going to make it apply to every material which uses that group. So that's another advantage of using groups, is that you can make an adjustment in one place, and because it's all sharing the same group, it's going to affect everything else as well. So everything is pretty good. Now just for this part, I'm just going to grab the camera. I'm going to duplicate it. And with this duplicate camera, I'm just going to zoom in down here, just so that we can see how our bump mapping is turning out. Because often, if you don't get close enough, you'll find that the bump is in the wrong direction, or it's not showing up or whatever. Anyways, along the wing here, it's coming out pretty well. It's not too bad. But over here, you can see the bump map is actually inverted. It's going the wrong direction. And that, I've found, is because you need to select the whole mesh and then hit recalculate normals. Because during the creation of this, when we did the solidify modifier or whatever, I'm assuming that the normals came a different direction for the engine. Once we've done that, you can see that now the bump map is in the right place. So everything is fine and dandy. So there's only one thing left to do, and that is for our windshield. We need to give it a material as well. So I'm going to use that same cheat as I did before, which is instead of using glass, I'm going to be using a transparent shader along with a glossy shader. Drag it across, set the roughness to 0, of course, because we want to make it sharp. And then let's just take a look at that. So the windshield should look a little bit more realistic. Yes, that actually looks pretty spot on, like that. So that is not too bad. That's pretty good. All right, we could probably call it quits right here. I'm going to do a few little tiny slight adjustments. I'm going to move the camera just this way a little bit, just so that we get a sort of nicer view. I think sort of like a little bit more side on as opposed to front on, like so. And let's move that across as well. Okay, and the other thing you want to make sure is that the light, our sun lamp, is actually in the right direction. That's something I didn't really talk about very much, but you want to match that with whatever your backdrop is showing. So having a look at the clouds, which direction is the sunlight coming from? It looks as though it's sort of coming from this direction, like from actually sort of behind the plane, like sort of pointing that way. So let's just try that. Okay, and probably facing a little bit down as well. And let's try that. We should get, there we go. It's coming out a little bit more realistic now. It's not as full blown at the front there. It's also, the background's got a little bit of a subtle yellow to it. So I'm just going to adjust that as well, just to make it look a little, you know, match the exterior a little bit better. There we go. It's looking a little bit nicer already. You can see the longer you spend on it, things just, you know, detail. It's all about the detail. And it's one of the reasons why I really want to like break off and make a scene that takes, you know, takes me like 3 weeks to make, just for my own personal self, because you can really make a nice scene when you focus in on the details. But it doesn't really suit for a tutorial, you know. Anyways, what I'm doing now is I want to create some bars, like add some detail to this windshield. So I'm just going to duplicate that shield there. I'm going to hit P, make it its own separate object. And then with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Wireframe tool. And what that's going to do is it's going to make each one of these edges here become its own, what would you call it? Own sort of bar, okay? Because if you have a look at a real windshield of a 747, oh, look at that. Isn't that great? I searched for 747 wing and it's come up with winged beast. But that's pretty perfect. So we've got one bar there. We've got a nice big open area here. So we've got 1, 2, and then one more in the middle. So we've got 2 off to the side. So move that across. Like that. And then we've got, I think we actually don't even have one there. So let's remove that one. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, and then I'm just going to grab that. Just move that across to there. And I'm going to hit Control F. And this is where we use the Wireframe tool. And we just select Wireframe like that. And then we just increase that to be however thick that we actually want it. And that's it. Now, because we've got subsurf turned on, you want to turn that off. And you probably want to give this a, let's give it the winged silver material. Something like that. And then, of course, because it's hiding behind our subsurfed mesh, you want to bring parts of it forward. Like that. And, of course, you can clean that up a little bit more. I mean, the whole windshield really was a bit of a rush job for this tutorial. But yeah, again, one of those things. Spend a bit more time on it and it'll come out a little bit nicer. But there we go. That concludes the tutorial. So you should now have a complete 747-400 customized with your own logo, your own brand. I want to see somebody send through a render of their own face on the plane. I think that'll look hilarious. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Go out there, go nuts. Start making some cool planes or some cool vehicles. Looking forward to seeing what you create. If you create something cool, put it in the comments below. And of course, as with every YouTuber, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So that's all from me, and thanks for watching. Bye.